Never think working on an oil rig is just another job. It's a whole different beast. And I learned that the hard way. You're out there, stuck in the middle of the ocean, no land in sight, and every day feels like it's trying to break you. I'm about to take you through what it's really like, and trust me, it's not what you see in those shiny recruitment ads. So yeah, my name's Jake. I'm 28, been working offshore for about 3 years now. I didn't plan on this life. Honestly, who does? I grew up in a small town, thought I'd end up fixing cars or something chill like that. But money talks, and oil rigs pay stupid good if you're willing to trade your sanity for it. I signed up after a buddy told me he made more in 6 months out there than he did in 2 years on land. Sounded like a no-brainer. 3 years later, I'm still here, still alive, still wondering if I made the right call. This story's from last summer, one of those stretches that stuck with me. It's not glamorous, it's not easy, and by the end, you'll see why most guys don't last. The big problem out here? You're trapped. Not just physically, though yeah, you're on a giant metal island surrounded by nothing but water, but mentally too. Imagine waking up every day knowing you can't leave, can't see your family, can't even step outside for fresh air without a harness and a safety check. It's you, the crew, and the rig 24/7 for weeks at a time. My last shift was a 21-day hitch, and it started normal enough, but by day 3, you're already feeling the walls close in. The noise never stops, pumps humming, drills screaming, metal clanging. You get used to it, sort of, but it's always there, like a headache you can't shake. And then there's the weather. Out in the Gulf of Mexico, where I was last summer, it's either scorching hot or a storm's trying to rip the rig apart. No in between. Day 1 of that hitch, I woke up at 5 a.m. to the sound of the alarm blaring through the bunk room. It's a tiny space, 4 of us crammed in there. Metal bunks stacked like sardines, no windows, just fluorescent lights that make everything look sickly yellow. My bunkmate, Tony, was already up, swearing under his breath about how he spilled coffee on his boots. He's a big guy, loud, always complaining but never serious about it. "Another day in paradise, huh, Jake?" he said, kicking his wet boot across the floor. I just grunted, still half asleep, and dragged myself out of bed. You don't get much rest out here. 12-hour shifts, sometimes more if something breaks, which it always does. We're roughnecks, me and Tony. That's what they call the grunts who keep the rig running, fixing pipes, hauling gear, making sure the oil keeps flowing. It's dirty, sweaty work, and your hands are black with grease by the end of every shift. After a quick breakfast, eggs that taste like cardboard and coffee that's more mud than drink, we headed out to the deck. The rig's massive, like a floating city, all steel and rust and pipes twisting everywhere. It's loud out there too, but different from inside. You've got the ocean crashing against the legs of the platform, the wind howling, and the machinery roaring like it's alive. That morning, the sun was already beating down, turning the deck into an oven. I could feel the sweat soaking through my shirt before we even started. The first few days were standard. We'd check the pressure gauges, tighten bolts, climb up to the derrick to inspect the drill bit, stuff you do on autopilot after a while. But here's the thing. Out there, nothing stays routine for long. By day 5, the challenge hit. The weather turned ugly fast. 1 minute it's clear skies. The next, there's a wall of gray rolling in, waves smashing higher against the rig. The supervisor, this grizzled guy named Carl, who's been doing this since the 80s, called us in for a briefing. "Storm's coming," he said, chewing on a toothpick. "Gonna be a rough one. Get your gear ready and don't screw around." You could hear the edge in his voice. He'd seen rigs take a beating before, and guys who didn't listen didn't always come back. Storms are the real test out here. The rig's built to handle it, sure, but when the wind's screaming at 60 miles an hour and the waves are 20 feet high, you start wondering how much it can really take. That night, we strapped everything down. Tools, crates, anything that could turn into a missile in the wind. My hands were shaking a little, not gonna lie. I've been through storms before, but this one felt different. The air was thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on us. Tony kept cracking jokes, saying stuff like, "If we go down, at least I won't have to eat that crap food anymore." It was funny, kind of, but you could tell he was nervous too. Next morning, the storm hit full force. I was on shift, out on the deck with Tony and a couple other guys, trying to secure a loose pipe that had come free in the night. The rain was coming down sideways, stinging my face like needles, and the wind was so loud I couldn't hear myself think. The deck was slick, rocking under our feet as the waves slammed the rig. You're tied off with a harness, clipped to a safety line, but it still feels like one wrong step, and you're gone. I looked out at the ocean, nothing but black water and white foam, stretching forever. It's humbling, you know? Makes you feel small, like the rig's just a speck in something way bigger than you can handle. We got the pipe locked down, but then the radio crackled, Carl's voice cutting through the static. "Pump's acting up. Need you down in the lower deck now." Great. The lower deck's the worst spot in a storm. Dark, cramped, and so close to the water you can hear it pounding the hull. Me and Tony grabbed our tools and headed down. The stairs were slippery, rusted metal creaking under us, and the lights flickered every time the rig took a hit. Down there, it's all pipes and valves, a maze of steel that smells like oil and salt. The pump was whining, this high-pitched screech that meant it was about to blow if we didn't fix it. Tony got to work on the bolts while I checked the pressure readings. Way too high, redlining fast. That's when the real development kicked in. We're down there, soaked, yelling over the noise, when the whole rig shuddered. Not just a sway, a hard jolt, like something smashed into us. Tony dropped his wrench, and I grabbed the railing to keep from falling. The lights went out for a second, then flickered back on. "What the hell was that?" Tony shouted, eyes wide. I didn't know, but my gut was screaming that something was wrong. The radio was dead, no signal, just static. We kept working, faster now, adrenaline pumping. The pump was still screaming, but we got it stabilized, barely. Another jolt hit, and this time I heard a groan, like metal bending somewhere deep in the rig. By day 10, the storm was still raging, and we were all on edge. Sleep was a joke, maybe 3 hours a night if you were lucky. The crew was snapping at each other, tempers short. Carl pulled me aside that afternoon, out on the deck where the wind was still tearing at us. "Keep an eye out," he said, spitting over the railing. "Something's off with the stabilizers. If they go, we're in deep." The stabilizers are what keep the rig steady, big hydraulic legs that anchor us to the seabed. If they fail, the whole platform could tilt, or worse. I didn't want to think about worse. The next few days were a blur. Checking gauges, running diagnostics, praying the storm would let up. The ocean was a monster, waves crashing over the lower deck now, flooding the walkways. One night, I was up on the derrick with Tony 100 feet above the water, fixing a sensor that had gone haywire. The wind was brutal, tugging at my harness, and the rain made everything slippery. I could barely see Tony through the spray, just his orange jacket bobbing in the dark. "This is insane!" he yelled, laughing like a maniac. I didn't laugh back. My hands were numb, and all I could think was how easy it'd be to slip. Then came the key moment. It was day 14, middle of the night, and I was down in the control room with Carl and a tech named Sarah. The storm was at its peak, waves so high they were hitting the main deck, 50 feet up. The screens were flashing warnings, stabilizer pressure dropping, hull stress critical. Carl was barking orders, sweat beading on his forehead, even though it was freezing in there. Sarah was typing fast, trying to reroute power, but the system was lagging. Then it happened, a massive boom, louder than anything I'd heard out here. The rig lurched hard to the right and I slammed into the wall. Alarms blared, red lights everywhere. "Stabilizer's gone!" Sarah yelled, her voice cracking. For a second, nobody moved. Then Carl was on the radio, calling the Coast Guard, while me and Sarah ran to the lower deck to check the damage. The hallway was tilted, water sloshing ankle deep, and the air smelled like burnt metal. We found it. One of the stabilizer legs had buckled, bent like a straw under the pressure. The rig was listing, not sinking yet, but bad enough that you could feel it in your bones. Back topside, the crew was scrambling, guys tying down gear, others just staring at the water like it was about to swallow us. Tony found me, pale as a ghost. "We're done, man," he said, and for once, he wasn't joking. The Coast Guard chopper got there at dawn, just as the storm started to ease. They evac'd half the crew, me included, airlifting us to a supply ship a few miles out. From the air, I could see the rig, tilted, battered, but still standing, barely. The rest of the guys stayed to stabilize it, and somehow they pulled it off. No one died, which was a miracle. But the rig was out of commission for months. My hitch ended early, 17 days instead of 21, and I was back on land, kissing the ground like some cheesy movie hero. Looking back, that stretch last summer was the closest I've come to quitting. The money's good, yeah, but out there, you're always one storm away from everything going sideways. I've got stories like that piling up, some funny, some terrifying, all real. It's a life most people can't imagine, and honestly, I don't blame them. You don't get it till you're there, feeling the rig shake under your feet, wondering if today's the day it all falls apart. I'm still here, still signing up for hitches, but every time I step on that helicopter, I ask myself why. If you liked hearing what it's really like out there, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories where this came from.